Welcome to Work This Way, a labor and employment podcast. I'm Tina Emerson, here today with Maynard Nexon, labor and employment lawyer Grant Close. Good to see you, Grant.
Good to see you, Tina.
Well, today we are talking to Armando Llorente, a SHRM certified career HR professional and now owner of Llorente HR Consulting, LLC.
Yeah, after 40 years of being in the HR industry with multiple Fortune 100 companies spanning across North America and South America, Armando, who is bilingual, is here with us to share some of his stickiest workplace experiences from that impressive career. I found in my work as an employment attorney that hearing from others who've been in the trenches and the same work that we're doing is some of the most valuable information that we can get. And so we're happy to have Armando here with us to share some of his experiences.
Great. So before we get started, Armando, tell us a little bit about your career, how you got into HR, and your different types of roles, and what you really enjoy about this consulting work.
Sure. Thank you, Tina, and thank you, Grant. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So I got into the world of human resources while I was working in a manufacturing facility where my junior year of college, as I was taking some management courses, the HR director approached me and said, "We're being audited by the EEOC. I need someone that can help me do some analytics of a variety of employment data, some questions related to applications and record keeping and so forth. I know you're studying this in school. Can you help me?" And so I said, sure. Had an opportunity to participate in the process. I sat in on the closing conference with the inspector, and it sort of piqued an interest so that for the balance of my 2 years in school, I was able to focus on HR-related courses. And at the time that I graduated, I started looking for employment. And one of the companies, and in fact, the sister company of the facility that I had worked in South Carolina, offered me an opportunity in New Hampshire. So I came to New Hampshire as the HR assistant working with a company of about 300 employees. And over the 10 years or so that I was there, we grew from 300 to 1,100, had an opportunity to do a variety of roles, went from human resources and employee relations focus to training and development and a lot of career-oriented type work. And along the way, had opportunities to also visit again with the EEOC because as a federal contractor, we were prone to inspections of all of our hiring activity and promotions and so forth. And had some very interesting and very creative ideas as a result of discussions with the EEOC, because in rural New Hampshire, the population is not, let's say, as diverse as other areas, for instance, in South Carolina. So rather than being told, hey, you should make a point to recruit in the Boston area and bring individuals who are of different racial backgrounds into your area, we had a very, very candid conversation where the focus was all about the growth and development of females in the workforce and created pre-supervisory training programs and really were able to focus in that area of employment, which has sort of ignited another passion of what, as an HR practitioner, what can I do in the workplace to really create pathways for individuals to be successful, either as an individual contributor or as a manager. And then that's something that I continue to do now in my consulting work. Along the ways, I've had opportunities to be in a variety of leadership roles where I went the traditional track of HR manager to senior HR manager to director and ultimately to VP of Human Resources until about 2.5 years ago when I started my consulting firm and working with a variety of clients that are both nonprofit and wealth management, manufacturing operations where I can be used as a sounding board and be able to offer some of my perspectives and experiences from the various Fortune 100 companies that I've worked with along the way.
Well, Armando, you've already mentioned a plethora of experience with the EEOC, one of the major government agencies that we in the labor and employment world interact with. Another is the National Labor Relations Board, and that entity has been in the news a lot over the last 2 years or so. Particularly their general counsel, who's issued a lot of interesting opinions. And as a result of that, we have been talking to clients perhaps more than usual, especially in parts of the country that aren't as accustomed with union activity about union avoidance training. When we talk about legal issues related to the NLRB, a lot of times we end up by saying, but the best prevention is great employee relations and union avoidance training. Talk to us, as someone who spent his career in the Northeast, where there are a lot more unions and more union activity, about some experiences you've had with NLRB related issues.
Sure. I'll be happy to talk about two specific experiences. One where I went through a union organizing campaign, and then another when I was promoted into a new role where I was working directly with the IBEW. But for purposes of the first scenario, when I was promoted into my role in Maine, during the interviewing process, I had been told that, well, on the employee relations sides, we've heard that there are a couple of individuals that are disgruntled with some of the treatment that they're seeing from their managers, and this is an opportunity to keep an eye on what's going on. So that, coupled with two specific instances where managers on their own decided that they were going to administer policy in a way different than what the handbook had indicated and what the history of the facility had indicated, that helped to agitate a couple of additional employees. And before you know it, we had a representative from the machinist who was across the street on a regular basis, doing leafleting to the employees and trying to gain interest and so forth. And before you knew it, we were represented with a unionization petition by the machinist, indicating that they wanted to represent the company. So we obviously fought that, and over a 6-week period, I worked very closely with general counsel from a firm similar to yours, Grant, where we were provided very important coaching and counseling for purposes of what we needed to do to remain within the NLRB, and then coupled with the director of labor relations for the company, who was essentially my right-hand person in helping us from a communication, from a campaign awareness standpoint, from the various meetings that we were having with employees, et cetera, to ultimately demonstrate that we did not need a union in the workplace. And we did not. We were very successful in the unionization attempt and in beating the election process to the tune of about 3-1. So out of a population of about 150, the vote was resounding that no, we did not want to go union, but it certainly helped validate a couple of very, very important points. And then you talked about these from an employee relations standpoint. If the policies are in place, they need to be followed, and they need to be followed consistently, and not get into a situation where Grant does it one way, Armando does it another, and Tina does it yet a different way. So lesson learned there, follow the policy. Second, from a communication standpoint, be very proactive and very crisp in what you're doing, so that for any type of changes that we had, whether they were in work units or even the reconfiguration of manufacturing areas, we went out of our way to explain, this is what's going on, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to incorporate cell manufacturing rather than the traditional, this is the way that one piece of manufacturing equipment goes from one department to the next, and so forth. So very interesting experience. One that for 6 weeks, it was very intense. And, as a 3-shift operation, I was at work from 7 in the morning until midnight to go home to get a couple hours of sleep to come in and fight the good fight the next day. And at the end of the day, was very relieved with the results. About a year after that, I was offered an opportunity to step into a new role as the Director of Human Resources for a research development and equipment development organization outside of Boston, which did have the electrical workers, and a long-standing union where the prior relations with the HR director were a bit strained. And my approach was just to come in and say, hey, this is day one. I'm here to really be a conduit to help you understand what the company is trying to do, and at the same time give you the opportunity to tell me what you're trying to do from a union standpoint, because we're in this together. And fortunately, we were able to avoid a lot of simple grievances that had been submitted, because on a daily basis, I was checking in with the union steward to say what's going on, what's not going on, and keep me aware of any buzz that you may have for purposes of employee issues that might be coming. So our statistics indicated that the number of grievances went from like 13 in the first year to like 4. And people were asking me, what did you do or what's going on? I said, well, I really didn't do anything other than have, very regular and open discussion with the union steward and be able to address situations that we faced. We went through a coordinated bargaining process with 3 other sister unions between the machinists, the Teamsters, and the glass workers. And our business agent, meaning the electrical worker, and I, we had our proposals. It was like all in concrete. This is what we're doing, how we're doing it. While the other groups that were in Baltimore spent the better part of 2.5 days still gnashing and wondering, how they were going to come to resolution. And ultimately, we were asked by the VP of HR, what happened? What was the magic elixir here for you to be so successful and having everything done in such a short time? It's like, 1, we communicated. 2, we realized that this is a partnership, and I wasn't trying to get the best of the union wasn't trying to get the best of the company, and we had a pretty collaborative relation to the point that during the negotiations process, the business agent from the IBEW moved back and came up to me and said, we should write a book about this because this is not the way it's supposed to work. So, but a great experience.
That does sound like an intense several weeks. You've talked about a couple of these already, but what types of union avoidance training or techniques did you find particularly effective?
Great question. We focus, and again, I go back to communications, making certain that as managers were interpreting policy, if they had any question on what needed to be done, to come and check with me or to check with their management structure, meaning rather than the department managers, that they could go and speak to the director of manufacturing operations, just to make sure that they were being consistent in the administration of the policy. That being said, the manufacturing team also spent considerable training and considerable time with the various foremen and department managers on the first, second, and third shift to ensure that there was continuity among the interpretation of the policy. That being said, we also talked about some do's and don'ts for purposes of what managers should be asking and talking to employees about versus the more traditional tips scenario which we learned through the union organizing attempt, where you can't threaten, you can't interrogate, you can't promise, and you can't survey or spy on what people are doing. So training and really being proactive with the leadership team was paramount in making sure that policies were being administered correctly, consistently. And if there were any questions, we also encouraged the managers to say, Tina, that's a good question. I will get back to you, rather than say something that you needed to back off on and come back and say, gee, Armando, I'm sorry that I said it's like this, but it's not. That being said, I mentioned earlier the importance of having a law firm like Nixon, for instance, to be available as a sounding board for purposes of what is happening in the NLRB or what is happening in the current union environment, to make sure that the company is aware of that, and at the same time being proactive in saying, okay, we need to train our managers in whatever the hot topic issue is, or we need to make sure that the verbiage in our handbook is appropriate for purposes of no implied content or intent rather, or implied contracts based on verbiage that was in the handbook. So another important piece was the fact that we relied on our legal counsel to really be a different set of eyes and help us go through policies and procedures to ensure that we weren't going to get ourselves in trouble.
Armando, switching gears a little bit now, we hear a lot about the economy on a daily basis in the news. And as an employment attorney, I think we're sometimes on the front lines or getting a preview of what's really going on in the labor market. And I've seen this year at least, there being some trends of restructuring with various clients and employers. In your experience, what are some of the challenges that you've seen when a company has to change structure, whether it's a RIF or just an organizational change, and especially in big companies that may have a lot of layers of leadership and a number of executives who may even be international?
Great question. And it comes back to having a different set of eyes that can partner with you to make sure that your actions are appropriate and not getting into a situation that by virtue of the fact that you identified in an international employee, it's like, okay, we're going to get rid of that international employee when he or she or they may be performing better than one of their counterparts that is being kept because he's got seniority. So one of the elements that we conducted oftentimes when we were going through a RIF, and this happened at least 3 of the larger companies that I was with, we went through a very extensive questionnaire for purposes of looking at the individual's time in the job, their qualifications, their performance reviews, and so forth, so that we were in a position to compare equitably rather than being in a position that all of a sudden we were making some indiscriminate decisions and getting ourselves in trouble. And to that point, we had and this was within the corporate legal team of my companies, basically holding us to task. So we would have meetings coming in and being told, if you had to eliminate X% of the organization, what would it look like and who would be impacted? And through the ongoing interactive process with the attorneys, looking at the questionnaires that have been submitted, analyzing the data to support or to fight, if you will, the recommendations that we were making. It made for some very productive meetings. And at the end of the day, we did not have any type of scenario where someone filed a unfair labor practice by virtue of the fact that we laid them off indiscriminately.
Well, Armando, we just have time for one more question, but I believe it's a fun one. And I'll take this one, Grant, because I am the non-lawyer in the room here. And I always have the most fun on these employment law podcasts because the stories that you all have seem unbelievable. And I know you can't really make this stuff up. But if you could tell us and share with us something that has happened in your career that has just been wildly unbelievable, we'd love to hear it and end on that.
We could be here for a while, but the one that I will always just shake my head and say, wow, how could this be? So I referenced earlier, we were doing some pre-supervisory training, and particularly for women in the workforce and helping them be successful interviewers. So I was in the middle of an interview for someone that was going to be considered for a materials analyst role. Going through the questionnaires, blah, 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 we're wrapping up the interview. And I said, okay, Mary, thank you very much for your time. This is what's going to happen next. And she said, Armando, thank you. She reached out and put her hands on my knees and said, I would do anything for this job. So I just froze. I said, thank you. Interview's over. I went running into the office of the Director of Human Resources, and he's like shocked. And it's like, what's going on? I said, this is what I said. This is what she said. This is where she put her hand. This is what I did. No, as soon as I finished that conversation, I got on the phone. I called my wife at the hospital laboratory where she was working. I said, dear, this is what happened. This is what I said. This is what she said. This is how I handled the situation. And it's like, what are the odds that after doing all this training on these are the things that you should not be doing, and this is what you can do to be professional in your interview, that lo and behold, I have a scenario like that where it's like, wow. And to this day, as I talk to several of my other colleagues, it's like, you can't make this up. And it's like, Armando, you think that's crazy. Let me tell you about my situation, which was similar to that, and blah, 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 blah happened. And it's sort of like, as I may have told Grant ahead of time, I think I'm going to write a book once I retire, the things that happen in the world of human resources that just make you shake your head and go, wow.
Well, if anything, that's a great way to weed out the bad listeners in a conference scenario.
It's not because of the training, Armando. It was good training, just someone wasn't listening.
Yeah.
Well, we have run out of time, Armando. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time. Grant, good to be with you today.
You too, Tina.
We will see you next time on Work This Way.